I just want you to understand where consciousness comes from. It comes from the fabric of space and time vibrating, and it's picked up by water molecules, and it leads to the generation of these electrical currents, which we see as neurological signals that associate with consciousness. Now, all of this is showing up in our brains, in our bodies, as a result of this activity that's going on in the fabric of space and time. So this activity, whatever it is, it's consciousness at work. And it's being, if you like, almost alchemically transmuted into electrical signals in the brain, courtesy of these water molecules. And if we look at what's actually going on in the fabric of space and time, we can learn a lot of things about how things are brought into reality. Real things like particles, but also things that are kind of intangible, like consciousness. So at that scale, that realm, if you like, two things are going on. Real things like particles, electrons that make up electrical currents are coming into reality. Also, things that we wouldn't normally consider to be material, like consciousness, thoughts, and feelings, somehow the vibrations that are represented at quantum realms seem to come through these tubes of protein via the water molecules. But the important thing to remember here is that there are real things, physical things that are coming through, but there are also things which might not necessarily be considered to be physical, but they're coming through. And that's basically what's going on inside your brain. Now, when I studied quantum physics, I learned something really important, which is very kind of a core principle in leadership, which is this. There is no such thing as a sure thing in the universe. There's no such thing as a likelihood of something happening with 100% probability. In fact, at fundamental levels in the universe, everything that's going on is simply a probability. It's simply a possibility. Nothing's for sure. Nothing's absolute. Now, if everything's just a possibility, then how come we have any kind of consistent reality out here at all? And if you understood a little bit about the maths of quantum physics, then the most magical thing that would come out of it is you would see in the maths two kind of components that describe how things come into reality. Everything, before it comes into reality, it has two parts to it. It has a real part, and it has what is in mathematics actually called an imaginary part. Now, the dynamic between this real and imaginary kind of entities, if you will, subatomic quantum realms, how those two actually influence each other determines what turns up in the real world, whether it's a particle or whether it's a vibration that ultimately is converted into thoughts and feelings. So at the most fundamental level in the universe, there are real and there are imaginary forces at work, and how they marry determines how reality is actually formed, and even how our awareness of reality is actually formed through our consciousness, thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. Now, this real and imaginary forces, they're almost like masculine and feminine forces, okay? So at fundamental levels in the universe, masculine and feminine forces are getting together, and they are literally conceiving reality. That's what's going on, okay? Now, I find it interesting that if you have thought and feelings coming from this realm, and it's the same realm as material particles are coming from and material reality is being created from, then the question to ask is consciousness, thoughts and feelings, is that something that should be considered to be separate from material reality, material particles that are coming from the same place? And it's easy to think that. It's easy to think, well, there's material particles and there's consciousness. I don't see them coming up together. I don't see a material particle coming up that's conscious, for example. Or I don't see a thought or a feeling in the form of a particle, for example. I don't tend to see that. But if you were to go down into that space-time fabric that we're all immersed in, you would probably find something that is sentient, that is intelligent, and that has the ability to manifest either as something real, like a material particle, or for it to manifest as a thought or a feeling or a perception. Okay? And as I said, wherever these things come from, they seem to be sourced in forces that have a real part to them and what is mathematically described as an imaginary part to them. Now, when the real and the imaginary come together in this virtual realm, we end up with something in this world, in our three-dimensional world, that can be considered to be tangible in some kind of way, either as material particles or a tangible experience of a feeling or a perception or a thought. This is how reality is created. It has this real component, the material component, if you will, and it has this component which I always have found strange because it's been described mathematically as an imaginary component. And I find it fascinating because it literally, when it shows up in this world, it literally determines the amount of consciousness or imagination that's attached to everything that turns up in this world. All right. So the world, our thoughts and feelings, even what you do if you're a leader, ultimately is determined by how you manage the balance between the real and the imaginary, between what you can measure with your numbers and your accounts and everything else, and what you can imagine, what your gut instinct tells you, and what your feelings tell you,